All-Star break upon us here in the 2025 MLB season. We're taking a little All-Star break too. Your 2025 New York Mets beat reporters Joe Henry here with Grace McCarron, Brendan Shorey. We're coming from, as you could see from Brendan's screen, all across the globe. I'm back in Massachusetts this week. Grace is in London, England. Brendan's down in Texas, which you can barely see on his map there. And the Mets are scattered all over as well. You have a couple folks down in Atlanta, and then you have a lot of the rest of the team taking the week off as they gear up for the rest of this 2025 season. And 97 games through, Mets are 55-42. It was a season that was, I think you could look at it as good so far. I think at parts of the season you would have said it's been great. And then you had a really, really rough June after that phenomenal May. And then it kind of balanced out in a July where you go into the break 6-4 in your last 10. You get a nice series win against the Yankees. Things starting to come together a little bit, but still some uncertainty. I want to start off by just asking you guys if you could find either a word or a sentence to describe this Mets team in 2025 so far, given everything that's happened in these 100 games, the roller coaster that this season has been. How would you guys write it down?
I would say this is a boring word to use, but I would just say interesting because there's been a lot that the Mets have had to deal with. They started the season with a lot of pitching injuries, and they're kind of just now coming out of that. And that hurts a team, but they managed a lot because a lot of their other pitchers did so well in the absence of Sean Manaea, in the absence of Frankie Montas, and then Kodai Senga went down for a while, etc. That kind of thing. They really punched above their weight a little bit. And then you saw a little bit, they kind of reverted back to kind of maybe what some people were expecting with the pitching issues in June, where the ERA just soared. You had pitchers who couldn't get past 4 innings, and it was pretty rough. But now they seem to have balanced it out a little bit. Going into the All-Star break, everything looks good. So I would just say interesting would be the word I would use. I'm certainly not going to say that they're going to run away with the National League or anything by any means, but I'm happy with where they are, and I'm interested to see what the second half brings.
I'm going to say unexpected, and I am going to have to explain this. It's not unexpected, the position they're in. I would say the way they started the year and I know we've talked about this probably a million times about how it was the pitching rotation who was really leading this team and how good they were, and the offense was taking a step back. Whereas preseason, everyone was kind of expecting, with the addition of Soto and looking at this lineup, that it was going to be the offense that kind of took off. And so seeing them come out and kind of flip-flop who was carrying who at the beginning was unexpected. And then you have a team that is playing so well, they're so hot, and they come in and have a big fall off for a month, which you didn't really see that happening. You didn't see the pitching really taking that big of a step down. And then for everyone to flip it around and start playing well again, I would say a lot of this season has been, like you said, a roller coaster, ups and downs, kind of not what you would expect when you would expect it.
Yeah, and the way that it evened out is that the Mets are now number 5 in the NL. They'd be the number 2 wild card. They're half a game back at the Phillies in the NL East race, which is looking like a 2-horse race, so that helps the Mets out. They're pretty comfortably in the playoffs, but as you guys talked about, especially on the pitching side, there's the lack of sustenance of what was a great start, right? They were easily the best staff in baseball for 2 months, and now look at a lot of the numbers. They're still top 10 in a lot of the big stats, 4th overall in ERA. They've given up the least home runs in all of baseball. But it's a pitching staff that I think if you look at the trade deadline, they need some help with. We'll talk about that in a moment, but today is the All-Star game. A couple of Mets will be seen in that game. Edwin Diaz has been probably the best reliever in all of baseball this year, even if he's not leading the league in saves. He's just been that dominant. He looks healthy again every time he comes into the game. All three of us probably already have our final score tweets drafted because we know that they're going to win, right? We already know that he's going to shut the door. And then you also have Pete Alonso, who has been one of the MVP favorites for the National League, especially the first 2 months of the season, but I think he's been consistent through the first 4 months, has been one of the best hitters in all of baseball. Those two are going to be down in Atlanta competing tonight in the All-Star game. Just talk a little bit about, and Grace, I want you to start talking about Edwin Diaz, the impact that he's had on this bullpen, because it feels like such a more holistic, I guess, bullpen when he's pitching and you know that you need to string together X amount of innings, and then once you get to him, you're good.
Yeah, definitely that is the feeling, especially when the starting pitching started to teeter a little bit in June. You kind of needed the Edwin Diaz insurance. If the Mets could get the offense in the game and take the lead, even with the starting pitcher struggling, Edwin Diaz could save that lead for you and theoretically win you the game. Whereas there's a lot of other arms in that bullpen where they were struggling and they would give up these runs. I'm trying to think off the dome right now, but like Ryan Stanek has been struggling sometimes. Sometimes he's been good, other times he's not very reliable. There's other guys like that as well, but he's that kind of insurance that they need. Even when, like, I will say, there are times he comes into the game, all of a sudden the bases are loaded, and then he gets, two strikeouts in a row and the game's over and everything's fine. He does sometimes make it interesting. I will say that. We'd like less of that, but, it's okay in the end, for the most part. But yeah, he's absolutely a very important piece of this Mets team going into the playoffs. He's going to be even more important. I mean, you need him to A, stay healthy and B, continue on this trajectory that he's been on because you need to be able to lock it down like that easily in the playoffs.
Yeah, I completely agree with Grace there. I mean, you said it before and you were like half joking, Joe, but I do actually have my final score tweet written going into the ninth inning when I know Edwin Diaz is coming in. And there have been maybe one or two times in all the games I've been at where I've had to go in and change it. And all I do is change it to add, say, a run to the other team and still a Mets win. And having someone so reliable there in that ninth inning is the beauty of having such a elite closer, yes, but also it helps how you manage the game in which you only have a certain amount of innings. You have less innings that you actually have to cover with these other guys in the bullpen. And when you have guys who are having great years, Brazaban, Buto, even Reed Garrett, like these guys who have been pretty reliable for you, you already know ninth inning you're shutting down the other team. That takes that one extra inning off the books. Now you don't have to worry about that. And if your starters give you length, it just makes managing that bullpen so much easier because you have such an elite guy coming in the ninth.
Yeah, Diaz 166 ERA in the first half of the season, a sub one whip by a mile, .87 whip, just a couple ticks above that 2022 season where he was so dominant. 19 saves recorded. On the other side of things, Pete Alonso has been so consistently good at that number 4 spot. 908 is his OPS through 97 games, a 280 average. He's a guy who feels like he's good for a hit a day, good for one home run or more in a series, and is just always coming through in the biggest moments. He hasn't been, I think, MVP caliber the past month, but he's still been so consistently either your best hitter or now that Soto is doing what Soto's been doing, we can talk about that as well. Soto will not be in the All-Star game. Both of these guys being your 3 and 4 have given so much life to this Mets lineup that has at times been inconsistent everywhere else in the order.
Yeah, I would say Pete Alonso, like when the offense was struggling, was kind of one of their only guys. Along, I'll give it to Lindor as well, and then Soto once he started heating up. But when a lot of their lineup was struggling offensively, like Pete Alonso was the guy who you think in a big moment, like he could do something here. He could change the trajectory of this game, which is important for a team that obviously has big playoff aspirations. You certainly hope that things can be divided a little more evenly amongst the lineup, and those other guys can also get offense going. But having Pete Alonso on your team is great, and even for the clubhouse as well. He's been around for it's a long time now. This is his 6th year in the big leagues. It's kind of hard to believe, but he's been around a long time. He's one of the voices in the clubhouse. I feel he's a very positive guy. Like even when they've been on stretches, he tries to be like, we know we're a good team and we know that we're going to get out of this. Lindor is another one of those guys as well. He's just very important to this Mets team. And, looking back on the winter when we weren't sure if he was still going to be on the Mets for a while there, it's kind of hard to imagine now looking back, like, wow, what if he wasn't on this team? How different would it be going into the second half?
Yeah, I've been at games where the Mets will put up 2 runs and lose, 3 runs and lose. And in the post-game presser, Mendoza's like, we're not getting any production from the bottom of our lineup, which means that those 2 runs, 3 runs came from early in the season, likely came from either Alonso or Lindor. Soto wasn't as big of a factor then. So just to show that in all these, whether they were close games or whether they were low scoring games, that you had Alonso and Lindor at the top of your lineup, scoring runs, producing all season long is something that you have to take advantage of. And it's something you can't take for granted. You have such a good top of the lineup with these guys, one of the best power hitters in the league in Alonso. And it was a little disappointing to see him in the past month or so with his average kind of dropping from 320 ish down to 280. But I mean, he's still batting 280. He's still got great pop. Still a great guy to have at that 4 spot in your lineup.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate reality that the Mets have needed the kind of production they've gotten from their best players, and now you really need them to be able to sustain that. I think you can expect Soto to continue to be as great as he's been the past month. I think we'd probably all be in agreement that he should be in Atlanta right now at the All-Star game. Think you're going to need Alonso to kick back into the MVP caliber gear that he was in. And then you also look on the trade market where the Mets are expected to be pretty active and we can start with the pitching because I think that's where things have been most chaotic, but I do want to touch on the lineup too. We'll start with starting pitching. The Mets, the best way to describe the Mets starting pitching has just been injuries. That's been the story of the season for them. It feels like oftentimes it is for the Mets. Um, but also a team that's starting to get a little bit healthier. Even though you had some pretty big losses, Griffin Canning's going to be out for the entire year. All in all, he had been really productive for you. Tyler McGill is not, he's back on the 60-day IL right now, so he's probably not going to be in your rotation for the rest of the season. You did get Frankie Montas back. Sean Manaea came back right before the All-Star break. So now you start to see a rotation coming into picture. Is there a move that you'd like the Mets to make, or do you think that with the number of arms that they have starting pitching, even if you don't have anyone who's on a roll right now, you have enough talent between Manaea and Senga who should be, as long as they're able to come back from these injuries and be as good as they usually are, they can be top of the staff aces or 1 and 2s in your rotation. And then the rest of these guys, like a Clay Holmes, is someone who figures is a pretty good 3 or 4. Do you think that the Mets need help there, or do you think now that they're getting healthy that this is a rotation that you're comfortable with come October?
I would not mind if they got some pitching depth just because it's so important once you get closer to October to have more pitching than less pitching. So you never know, like going through the rest of the season, like who else is gonna get hurt, who else might like Sean Manaea, for example, who I really love. You don't know what you're gonna get out of him. We've seen him for one start and he was out for obviously quite a long time there. So you don't know how he's gonna be in the long run. So I'd say more pitching depth is better than less. One thing that I've seen thrown around is Zach Gallen for the Mets, he's been up and down this season. He's been better recently, but overall not his best season by any means. But he is. We know that he has great stuff. So I think that would be a good move for them. But I also wouldn't be surprised if they go more towards relievers because, as we were talking about earlier, they've had some issues there as well. I would prefer to get another starter just because of what we said about you don't know what's going to happen for the second half, and you also can have a little bit of freedom come October to move pitchers around, like put some guys in the bullpen, etc. Just see what works the best in the playoffs. So I think Zach Gallen is a solid move if they're going to go pitching.
I would not feel comfortable with Manaea as anything higher than my 3 going into the playoffs. Same reasons as you said, Grace, coming off that injury, has just been out for so long. You don't know exactly what you're going to get. I would love to see the Mets go grab a guy. Zach Gallen was a name I was going to throw out. The Diamondbacks are shopping Merrill Kelly as well. If you want to go to the AL, you have Seth Lugo, Joe Ryan, a couple of guys who, at least Seth Lugo, a couple of all-stars in there. If you can go get one of those guys to come in, and they don't even have to be your one. You have Senga to be your one. But if you can go get a guy who can comfortably be your number 2 starter in the playoffs, I would love to see the Mets go out and make a move for that.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think Joe Ryan's a guy that I look at. I'm really high on Joe Ryan. It's a different story for the Mets starting pitching than the relievers. The starters have some name value to them where you know that if they're healthy and going, that they can be towards the top of a rotation. But with virtually all of them, because of injuries or because of just okay but not stellar performance like a Clay Holmes, you don't have anyone who you're like, okay, this person's in stride right now. They should be a top of the rotation arm for the rest of the year, and I'm not worried about it. I don't think you could say that about any of the Mets arms, despite them having guys with top tier stuff like a Senga, like Minaya when he's on the run that he was on a couple of years ago or last year. In the bullpen, on the other hand, not a ton of injury concerns with most of their top names, but a lot of guys that have been inconsistent. Reed Garrett is someone who looked like was forming the best back end tandem in the entire major leagues in the first 2 months of the year. Him and then Diaz in the eighth and the ninth, you could book it. That's a Mets win. He's struggled, generally speaking, for the last 2 months. I think Buto, Brazoban, Stanek have all been good at times and also really struggled at times. Stanek is someone who you can see him. There was a game a week ago, I think it was the July 4th game against the Yankees, where he went two scoreless and was just dominant. It was super emotional after, like he was firing up the team, had this huge impact on that win. And then you have games where he's just given up a run every appearance. Inconsistency there. I would really like to see the Mets go after someone. I know that they'd been linked in rumors to Aroldis Chapman. Unfortunately, the Red Sox are suddenly good again, so probably not going to be on the market. Is there anyone that you guys look at, and at the very least, do you think that there is the need to go for people, even though that the Mets may have 5 or 6 guys that you like in a bullpen? They still don't have anyone behind Diaz who has shown consistently that they can be a guy that can take the seventh or the eighth and you can be comfortable with.
I mean, I would say Chapman would probably, I mean, Chapman's, I know Yankee fans like have their trauma with Chapman, but I think Aroldis Chapman is at the end of the day quite a good pitcher, but I don't think there's anyone else specifically that I'm looking at on the reliever side, just because I think the starting pitching, because it's been so up and down, I think that in general is a more pressing need for them. Because as you guys were saying, there's no clear like number two right now. After Senga, it's a little bit like, we're testing the waters here. So I would say that's where I would put my priority. But I mean, I know the Red Sox did just win 10 in a row, so now it's not really looking as 100% they're going to be selling. But hey, if we rolled as Chapman on the Mets, like, I don't hate that at all.
I would have said Chapman as well. I'm going to go different, though. I think the Mets need another high leverage arm. I think a lefty would have been ideal. Um, I would love to see the Mets inquire about Emmanuel Clase. The Guardians are not doing too hot this year. They're finally having a down year by their standards. Clase is getting somewhat up there in age. One of the best relievers in the game. I think if the Mets inquired about it, if they were able to pull off a move where they could bring in Clase, you have shut down eighth, ninth, no questions asked.
I hadn't thought about Clase. That would be a huge get if they were to get him, because I know that he hasn't been uh, to the level that he had been at last year before the playoffs when he kind of imploded. I know he's kind of brought that into 2025, but this is one of the best pitchers in all of baseball. On the offensive end, we talk about Chapman. Funnily enough, the one other guy that everyone talks about the Mets getting is Alex Bregman, who's also probably not on the market anymore somehow, because the Red Sox have decided to be good again. Um, that is the spot where the Mets probably need the most help offensively, third base. That's where the most question marks are. We talked in the season preview about Mark Vientos being a top 5 third baseman in the major leagues, and he is not that, unfortunately. And the Mets have done a lot of tweaking with the lineup in recent weeks, and I think generally that's something that's worked for them. Moving Lindor to the 2 spot from the leadoff spot, having someone like a Nimmo or a Marte lead off. I really like the front 5 that you have in this lineup, where you would go like Nimmo, Lindor, Soto, Alonso, and then maybe McNeil, Marte, whoever might be the 5. But then you have a defensive star in Tyrone Taylor, who I'm very comfortable being the bottom of the order. Luis Torrens, I think, has been generally unlucky at the plate. I think he's actually been a lot more. His at bats have looked a lot better than the surface level stats might indicate, but still there's a big glut in the 6 through 9 where you just have not gotten production all year. I'm interested to hear any names you guys might want to throw out and also positions that you're looking at specifically where you think the Mets need to address something if they want to have a competitive, like World Series caliber lineup the way that we thought that they might have going into the year.
I would say the name I've seen the most for center field is Cedric Mullins on the Orioles. Orioles, as we know, are pretty bad this year, so I think that would be solid. But I like Tyrone Taylor defensively. He's been great at center field. Offensively, there's a little left to be desired there. But I don't think he has to be like shipped off or anything because I just love his defense in center field. But yeah, I think third base for them is tough right now. I don't think the team wants to give up on Mark Vientos because I think they remember how he was last October, which isn't really that long ago, funnily enough. So they have that. They have Brett Beatty at the start of the year who looked fantastic. He's come back down to earth. So they kind of have two like so-so options at third base. So if they want to upgrade, I'm not mad about it. I mean, I'd love Alex Bregman to be quite honest. That would be fantastic, maybe less fantastic for Joe's purposes, but I would say if they're gonna upgrade anywhere offensively, I feel like Cedric Mullins makes sense for center field. It gives you a pretty solid outfield with Nimmo and Soto, of course, as well. But yeah, I don't know. I'm a little wishy-washy on third base. I don't want them to give up on Mark Vientos. I don't think the team wants to give up on Mark Vientos yet. So we'll have to see what they do there.
I got a few names. I think they should look at talking to the Diamondbacks, Eugenio Suarez. I know he's been linked to the Yankees. Great hitting third baseman. If they could bring him in, I know it's an interdivision. That's not. But going and getting a guy who's a great third baseman. He can play defense. He's average on defense, but a guy who can hit well. You bring him in. I think that's the biggest hole for the Mets right now is their third base. I think you also inquire about Naylor when you are talking to the Diamondbacks. He can go and you can slot him in at DH. And then the final name I like is Ryan O'Hearn. I know he's kind of been linked to a few teams across the league, but another great bat you can bring in. You can slot him in at DH. I know you have a few guys who are filling that role right now for the Mets, but if you go get a guy like O'Hearn who's been playing great this year, the Orioles are selling. I think those are a few big bats that could help the team.
Mets are in like a weird spot where we can look at through a microscope, we can look at third base first. Grace, I think you put it well. They have two guys that are very young that have shown like legit flashes, especially Vientos last year, but even Beatty, the 2 or 3 week run that he went on in late May. Guys that you want to believe in, and you don't want to trade for a guy who's a star and is going to take 70% of their ABs away or force Vientos back down to AAA like for the rest of the season. You don't want to do that, but at the same time, can you trust either of those guys to be as productive as you'd like them to be as your number 6 hitter, per se? And then for the rest of the lineup, you have a lot of folks like even Marte and Winker, who you know are good and can be pretty productive, but you also know that there are upgrades out there. So the Mets are in a very curious spot, I would say, when it comes to the trade deadline, regardless of what they do. And I think we're all in consensus that some moves have to be made. I don't think that anything super drastic needs to happen, but I still think this team could use a little shakeup, both offensively and with the pitching staff, in order to give them that added juice that helps propel a playoff run, regardless of the exact names they go after. And I think the people that we've talked about are all good targets and also pretty reasonable. Regardless of what they do, who they get, expecting that they do buy, this is a team that should contend, or at least contend in the playoffs, if not contend for a World Series title, because they have those top of the line names. Like a Juan Soto led team should be a World Series caliber team if you put the pieces around him. Come to October, we're going to meet right after the regular season ends, theoretically previewing the postseason. Where do you expect the Mets to stand? How do you expect the rest of the season to play out? How do you expect some of these problems like the pitching staff, the injuries, the lack of consistency, the lack of ability to hold up what had been a really good start for the pitching staff? All of these little questions that maybe aren't these crazy big, big issues that some teams need to contend with, but are still worthy of consideration and then have to be looked at pretty delicately. We talked about with the lineup. How do you think all these things play out when we meet again in October? Are they in a playoff spot? Are they the NL East champions? I know it's a lot to look at 2 months down the line, but we're that close now. Less than 70 games left in the season. We meet again just before October. What do you think the tone of that conversation is going to be?
I think it's going to be very optimistic.
I'm sure you think that.
I mean, I definitely think that because I try to be optimistic, but I would say first, I think they're definitely going to be in a playoff spot, barring some really awful things happening in the rest of the season. I think this team is definitely a playoff team. They should go comfortably in, unlike last season. But I don't know if I'm going to give them the NL East yet. The Phillies are right there. They have a lot of good players in that ball club. And when the Mets, when the Mets were floundering for a little bit recently, the Phillies capitalized and they now sit in first place. They're only half a game up now, but they're still threatening. The good news, you said it earlier, Joe, for the Mets is that it's only seems to be a two-team race for the division title. The Braves are clearly not going to go anywhere.
Actually, the Marlins are in third.
Yes, the Miami Marlins are
The
in third,
Miami Marlins.
which is really confusing. But the Braves are not doing anything. That was a theme preseason is are the Mets better than the Braves? And they clearly are. And so are the Phillies, and so are the Marlins. But point is, it's going to be the Phillies or the Mets, I think, for the NL East. I'm not going to definitively say that the Mets are going to win the NL East, but I think they can. And if they return to their caliber that they were at for much of the spring, I think this is their division. But as far as the playoffs, look, last year's team went to the NLCS after barely making the playoffs and frankly barely getting out of the wild card round. I don't see any reason why the Mets can't do that and possibly even better and go to the World Series. Obviously, when you have other teams in the National League that are very, very good, the Dodgers, the Padres, the Cubs, even this year, have been fantastic. There's a lot of great teams, but I think the Mets can at least go to the NLCS. And I hope I'm not jinxing them by saying that, but I think that that is what they're capable of, at least.
I think playoff spot, definitely. I'm going to stick with my preseason prediction. I think the Phillies take the division. I think it's going to be within 3 or 4 games. But since that first month of the season, I just think the Phillies have been a lot more consistent than the Mets have. I think they definitely will have the chance at making a run in the postseason. You said it, Grace. They did it last year. They've done nothing but build onto that squad from last year. Team got better. I know you have to compete with guys like the Dodgers and the Padres, but we've seen those teams are not Superman. The Dodgers just lost 6 in a row. So these teams are definitely beatable. I think an NLCS, a World Series run is definitely possible, but I think it comes from that wild card spot. But yeah, I think playoffs, they're definitely going, and they definitely have the chance to make a run.
Well, we'll see. We're going to check back in a couple months. In the meantime, we've got our Twitters on the screen. We're going to have coverage of every Mets home game from here until October, hopefully, and beyond. We'll see if the Mets are able to make it back to the NLCS. We'll see if they're able to make it even further. We'll be very curious to see not just how their all-stars perform tonight, but also the moves that they're going to make in the coming weeks, because it should be a few weeks that should determine maybe the rest of the season, not just for the Mets, but for the rest of the teams that they're contending with. A lot could change by the next time that we're meeting. For now, Grace McCarron, Brendan Shorey, I'm Joe Henry saying so long. We'll check back in with you later. This has been our All-Star break, first half of the season in review. Hope you guys enjoyed, and we'll catch you next time.